The photographer had been told about the moment in advance. I had described it to her at our planning meeting 6 weeks before the wedding. I said, "There will be a moment when Zoe reaches the end of the aisle and James is waiting, and he is going to do something." She said, "What is he going to do?" I said, "I do not want to describe it because I do not want to stage it. I want you to be ready for it. And I want you to have your longest lens on. And I want you to be positioned at the altar end of the aisle." She said, "Okay." She said, "How old is the flower girl?" I said, 6. She said, "And the groom? He knows she is coming." I said, "He has been waiting to receive her for 2 years." She said nothing for a moment. She wrote something in her notebook. She said, "I will be ready. I want to tell you about that photograph. But first I have to tell you about the 90 minutes before the ceremony. Because the photograph exists because of the 90 minutes, and the 90 minutes only make sense if you know who Carol is, and what she had been building since the night James told her about Zoe. My name is Emma. I am 34 years old. James is 37. We have been together for 3 years and we have been married for 14 months. Zoe is 7 now. She was 6 at the wedding. She is James's daughter in every way that matters, and will be James's daughter in every legal way very soon, which is a detail I will get to at the end. Zoe's biological father has not been in the picture since she was 11 months old, and has not sought contact. I am not going into that story here. What I am telling you is that Zoe has never not had James. She has had James since she was 4 years old. She calls him Daddy. She has called him Daddy for 2 years without anyone asking her to. It came from her. The way that things that are true come from somewhere real rather than somewhere prompted. James had told his mother Carol about Zoe on the 3rd date. He said he wanted her to know from the beginning. He said he was not going to present Zoe to her as a surprise later in the process. Carol had said all the right things. She said she was open. She said she understood. She said every child deserved love. She said these things in the warm, emphatic tones of someone who means them on the surface, and has not yet investigated what is underneath. The investigation happened over the following 2 years, and what Carol found underneath her stated openness was something she was never fully willing to name out loud. She found resistance. The specific resistance of a woman who had spent 37 years knowing exactly who her son's family would be, and who that family would contain, and who had not factored a 6-year-old from another relationship into that picture. She never said anything direct. Carol was not a direct person. She said things like, "James has such a big heart, and I admire how he has taken on the responsibility." And she said things like, "It must be so important to you to have Zoe involved on your special day," with a particular intonation that put involved and special day in slight tension with each other. She arranged Zoe's birthday gift from the family 2 months late, and said she had been so busy. She referred to Zoe as Emma's daughter consistently, and never as James's girl or their daughter or any formulation. That placed Zoe inside the family she was being built into. James noticed all of it. He addressed each instance, and each time Carol received the addressing with the practiced surprise of someone who had not realized. She had always realized. The wedding was in June. Zoe had been chosen as flower girl from the first conversation James and I ever had about the ceremony. Not as a gesture, as a fact. She would walk first. She would carry the basket we had chosen together, white with a woven handle and filled with pale pink petals. She would wear the dress we had bought on a Saturday in February at a bridal boutique, where she had stood on the fitting stool and turned in circles and said, "This is the best dress in the world," and the seamstress had said it looked like it had been made for her specifically. We had told Carol in March that Zoe would be the flower girl. Carol said, of course. She said, "How sweet. My maid of honor is my best friend Rachel. Rachel has known me for 14 years, and she has, over those 14 years, developed a specific skill that I did not ask for and rely on completely. She notices things before I notice them. She has a radar for the particular frequency of people who are managing their intentions behind their behavior. And she has never once been wrong about what she detected. On the morning of the wedding, Rachel came to me at 8:47. I know the time because I have the photographer's records, and the timestamp on the images shows her coming into the bridal suite at 8:47 and leaving at 8:53. I had been sitting in the chair at the makeup table, and the makeup artist had been working on my foundation, and Rachel had come in and asked the makeup artist for a moment. She knelt in front of my chair and she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it and stay exactly as calm as you currently are." I said, "Okay." She said, "I was in the corridor outside the venue catering room 20 minutes ago, and Carol was in there with James." I said, "Okay." She said, "I heard enough to understand that she was asking James to change the flower girl arrangement. She said she had bought a dress for his niece Ava. She said she felt that Zoe walking the aisle alone was not the right image for the family. She said, and I want you to hear this word for word, because I memorized it. She said this is James's fresh start and Ava represents the family he was born into." Rachel paused. She said, "James said no. He said no clearly. He left the room." She said, "But Carol is still in there, and I do not know what she is planning to do with the information that James said no." I looked at Rachel in the mirror. The makeup artist had quietly set her brushes down. I looked at my own face in the mirror for a moment. I was completely calm. Not the calm of someone who has suppressed something. The calm of someone who has been waiting for this particular shape of thing and knows exactly what to do when it arrives. I said, "Thank you." I said, "Go find Zoe and stay with her." Rachel said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I am going to have a conversation." She said, "Emma." I said, "I will be calm." She said, "I know you will. But I am coming with you." I said, "No." I said, "This is mine." She went to find Zoe. I finished my foundation. I thanked a makeup artist. I went to the catering room. Carol was still there. She was standing at the window looking out at the garden, where the chairs were being arranged. She heard me come in and turned around. She looked at me with the expression she always had when she looked at me. The open-faced warmth that had a particular distance behind it. The warmth of someone who has decided their feelings about you and is very good at not showing the decision. I closed the door. I stood in the middle of the room and I said 3 things. I said, "Carol, I know what you asked James," I said. "Zoe is walking down that aisle in a dress with her basket. And nothing about that is changing today or any other day." I said, "If you interfere with that in any way, if you say anything to Zoe, or to any guest, or to any member of staff about Ava, or the aisle, or the flower girl arrangement, you will leave this venue and you will not be in any of the photographs we display in our home." I let the silence hold for a moment. Then I said, "I hope you have a beautiful morning." I went back to the bridal suite. The makeup artist was waiting. She said, "How do you take your foundation?" I sat down. I said, "The same as before." She picked up her brushes. We did not discuss it. The ceremony was at 11. I want to tell you about the walk. Zoe's walk. Because everything before it is the story, and the walk is the reason for the story. I want you to see it. The ceremony was in the garden at the back of the venue, where they had set up 2 rows of white chairs facing a floral arch and the June. Light was coming in at the angle that June light comes in when it is late morning and warm, without being hot. A particular quality of gold that photographers call the best light. The musicians were playing something quiet and string-based that we had chosen together, James and me, from a list that Zoe had also been consulted on because she had opinions about music even at 6 years old. The guests were seated. 92 people. James was at the arch. I had not seen him yet. He was standing with the officiant and his best man, and he was facing forward, and I could see his profile from where I was waiting at the entrance with my father. Rachel was beside me. Zoe was in front of us. She had her basket. The petals were pink and white, and she had practiced the technique of releasing them with both hands, the two-handed scatter, which she had developed herself, and which she considered to be the correct and only method. She had practiced it in our hallway for 3 evenings. She was wearing the dress. The dress was white with a blue sash and a full skirt that moved when she walked, and she was wearing small white shoes with a strap across the instep, and she had flowers in her hair that the florist had put there that morning, and she had stood very still for the florist in a way that I recognized as Zoe deciding something was important and giving it her full concentration. She looked like the person she was, completely, recognizably herself. The music shifted to the processional signal. Zoe looked back at me. She said, "Is it now?" I said, "It is now." I said, "Walk slowly and scatter as you go." She said, "Two-handed." I said, "Two-handed." She turned to face the aisle. She took 1 step. Then she took another. She began to walk. And she began to scatter. The two-handed method. Pink and white petals. The guests watching. And at the far end of the aisle, James, who had turned to look when the music shifted, and who had seen her coming, and who had done the thing I had described to the photographer 6 weeks earlier without being able to name it. He had crouched down, right there at the altar, in front of 92 people. He had gone to one knee with his arms open, and his face doing something that I cannot describe except to say that it was the face of someone receiving something they have been moving toward for a long time and who is overwhelmed by the fact that it has finally arrived. Zoe saw him. She stopped scattering. She ran down the last 20 feet of the aisle with the skirt moving and petals still falling from the basket that was swinging in her hand, and she ran into his arms, and he closed them around her and held her, and the whole garden went quiet in the way that gardens go quiet when something true is happening in them. The photographer had her longest lens. She was at the altar end. She was ready. The photograph was taken at 11:0-4 in the morning. It shows James on one knee with Zoe in his arms, and his face in her hair, and her basket of petals still swinging slightly from the momentum of the run, and petals on the ground around them both. It shows 92 people watching. In the front row on James's side of the chairs, Carol is visible. She is watching. Her expression is not legible at that resolution, but she is watching. I walked down the aisle 2 minutes later. When I reached James, he had his arm around Zoe, who was standing beside him. He gave me his other hand. He said quietly, "She ran." I said, "I know." He said, "I want to do this every day." I said, "We are going to." The officiant said, "Shall we begin?" We began. The photograph was on our mantelpiece by the following weekend. The photographer had turned around the images in 4 days, which she said was faster than usual, but she said she had felt compelled. She said she had been photographing weddings for 11 years, and she had never caught a moment like that. She said, "He did not perform it. He just did it." I said, "I know." She said, "The way she ran." I said, "I know. It is the first thing people see when they come into our house now. Not the formal portraits. Not the ceremony photographs. The photograph of James on one knee with Zoe running to him at 11:04 on a June morning. It is the thing people stop at. It is the thing they ask about. We tell them. Now let me tell you about Carol and what happened in the weeks after the wedding. Because the wedding was not the resolution. It was a day. The resolution was longer and more complicated, and ultimately more honest. Carol had behaved at the ceremony and at the reception. She had watched the aisle walk without intervening. She had been in the reception photographs because she was James's mother, and her absence from those Photographs was not something I was prepared to do to James. She had held Zoe at one point during the cocktail hour, a photograph that Zoe requested actually, because Zoe did not carry the weight of what Carol had tried to do, and did not need to. Zoe was 6 years old and she had run down an aisle to her father, and the whole day was simply the best day of her life. And Carol was part of the family day, and Zoe wanted to be in a photograph with her. Children are sometimes the most clarifying people in a room. 3 weeks after the wedding, James sat down with his mother and told her what he knew. He told her about the conversation in the catering room. He told her what Rachel had heard. He told her what I had said to Carol before the ceremony. Carol did not deny any of it. She said, "I was worried that the walk would feel to the family like you were prioritizing Emma's child over James's actual family." James said, "Zoe is James's actual family." He said, "She has been my family for 2 years. She calls me daddy, and I am her daddy, and the walk was not a symbol of anything except that." He said, "And I need you to understand that when you tried to change that on the morning of my wedding what you were trying to change is not a symbol or an image. You were trying to change what is real." She said she had not thought of it like that. He said, "I know you did not think of it like that. I am telling you so that you can." He said, "I also need you to know that Emma came to you herself on the morning of the wedding, instead of calling security or calling the venue coordinator, or asking my dad to remove you. She came to you herself, because she wanted to give you the chance to make the right choice." She said, "I did not realize." He said, "I know." He said, "I would like you to make different choices going forward." He said, "Zoe and I are a package, not a symbol, a family." He said, "I hope you can find a way to be part of that." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to try." He said, "I know." He said, "Then we start now." He came home and told me. I said, "How do you feel?" He said, "Like something has been said that needed saying for 2 years." I said, "Yes." He said, "She said she wants to try." I said, "I believe she said it." He said, "Is that enough?" I said, "It is exactly enough. We start there. Let me tell you about the adoption, because it is the end of the story, and it is also the best part, and I want to tell it to you properly." 14 months after the wedding, on a Thursday in August, James legally adopted Zoe. The process had begun 7 months after the wedding, and it had been careful and documented and thorough, and on the Thursday in August it was complete. The courtroom was small. We had not brought many people. My mother, my sister, Rachel, James's father, who had been a quiet and consistent presence through all of this, who had never been the problem and had never been the loudest voice in the room, sat in the second row, and he cried from the moment we walked in until the moment we walked out. Not performance crying, the kind that comes from somewhere old and does not ask permission. The judge was efficient and warm in the way that family court judges sometimes are, when they know the paperwork in front of them represents something uncomplicated and good. She asked Zoe a question. She said, "Do you understand what today means?" Zoe said, "It means James is officially my daddy, and nobody can change that." The judge looked at James. James looked at Zoe. He said, "That is exactly right." The judge said, "Then I am very pleased to make it official." She stamped the documents. It was done. We walked out of the courthouse into the August sunlight, and Zoe was holding James's hand. And she said, "Can we get ice cream now?" He said, "We can get whatever you want." She said, 2 scoops. He said, 3. She said, 4. He said, "We can discuss it." She laughed. I watched her laugh with her whole body, the kind of laughing that takes over without permission. I thought about the June morning and the 2-handed scatter and the 20 feet of aisle she had run, and the arms that had opened at the end of it. I thought about the photograph on the mantelpiece. I thought about what James had said in the catering room to his mother and what he had said to his mother 3 weeks after the wedding, and what he had said to me every day in between. She is family. She has always been family. Nothing about that was ever going to change. The ice cream place was 3 blocks from the courthouse. We walked. Zoe held both our hands. She swung between us the way she had been doing since she was 4, the between the parents swing that she had claimed as her own specific expression of being exactly where she was supposed to be. We got to the ice cream place. She got 3 scoops. James said, "I thought we were discussing 4. She said, "I thought about it, and 3 is correct." We sat on the bench outside and ate ice cream in the August sun, and nobody needed to say anything about what the morning had been, because all of it was already there in the bench, and the 3 scoops and the swinging between the hands, and the fact that we were all, without qualification, in the same family. Carol was not there that day. She was told that evening by James's father. She called that night. She asked to speak to Zoe. I looked at James. He looked at me. I said, "Put her on." Zoe took the phone. She said, "Hello, Grandma Carol." Carol said something. Zoe listened. Then Zoe said, "I know." She said, "I know you are." She said, "Me too." She handed the phone back and went back to the book she was reading. I said, "What did she say?" Zoe said, "She said congratulations and she loves me." I said, "And you said you know?" She said, "I know she does." She said, "She is getting better at it." I said nothing. Zoe went back to her book. She has always been the clearest person in the room. I learned that from her. I am still learning it. One more thing. The dress. We had kept the flower girl dress after the wedding because Zoe had asked us to. She said, "I want to keep it." We had had it cleaned and wrapped and stored in the white box the bridal boutique had given us. When we came home from the courthouse on the Thursday in August, after the ice cream, Zoe went to her room. She came out 15 minutes later wearing the dress. She said, "I wanted to wear it again." She said, "Is that okay?" I said, "You can wear it whenever you want." She said, "It still fits." She turned in a circle. It still mostly fit. The hem was slightly higher than it had been in June. She had grown exactly as much as children grow in 14 months without asking permission. She turned in a circle in our living room in the August afternoon light, and the skirt moved and the blue sash was still the right color. And James said, "You look exactly like yourself." She said, "I know." She turned one more circle. Then she said, "I am going to wear it for dinner." She went back to her book. James looked at me. I looked at him. He said, "She wore it twice." I said, "I know." He said, "Same dress. Different day. Same family." I said, "Exactly the same family." He reached over and took my hand. Outside the August light was the particular gold that afternoon light is when it comes through west-facing windows. It fell across the floor. It fell across the books on the low shelf. It fell across the dress that Zoe was still wearing, sitting cross-legged with her book. She turned a page. The light held. This is the whole story. All of it. Every word of it true. Here is my question for you. If your mother-in-law tried to remove your daughter from the flower girl walk on the morning of your wedding because she said your daughter was not the right image for the family, what would you have done? Would you have stayed as calm as I did? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, I always do. I want to tell you about Rachel and what she said to me the evening after the wedding. We were in the hotel suite, just the 2 of us. Zoe asleep in the adjoining room, James downstairs with his father and best man at the bar, doing the things men do at the end of wedding nights that involve whiskey and comfortable silence. Rachel had taken her shoes off, and she was sitting on the end of the bed. And she said, "Walk me through the catering room." I said, "You know what happened?" She said, "I know what you did. I want to know what it felt like from the inside." I said, "It felt like I had been waiting for it." She said, "For what specifically?" I said, "For the moment when she finally showed me what was underneath." She said, "The warmth." I said, "It was always the warmth. The warmth was real, but the warmth had something underneath it. And the something underneath it was the story she had been telling herself about what Zoe was. And what Zoe wasn't, and what this family was, and what it wasn't. And on the morning of the wedding, she, finally, ran out of warmth to put on top of it. And it came out the way things that have been sitting for 2 years eventually come out." Rachel said, "And you were calm?" I said, "I was completely calm." She said, "How?" I said, "Because I had the photograph." She said, "You didn't have the photograph yet. The photograph happened after." I said, "I know. But I had the idea of it. I had told the photographer what was going to happen. I had held that image for 2 years. James on one knee, Zoe running. I had been building toward that for 2 years, and Carol was standing in a catering room with a plan that was not going to work." I said, "When you know the ending is right, the middle is manageable." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is the most insufferably composed thing anyone has ever said at the end of their wedding day." I said, "I know." She said, "I love you extremely." I said, "I know that too." We ordered room service. We ate on the bed. Zoe woke up at 10 and came through and ate half of Rachel's chips and fell back asleep between us, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was. It always has been. That is all I mean. Whatever Carol had in the catering room, it was not going to be stronger than that. It was never going to be stronger than that. There is one more thing about the photograph, about what happened to it after we posted it. James's father had asked if he could share it. He is not a social media person. He has one account that he uses to look at other people's photographs and never to share his own. He shared the photograph. He wrote 2 sentences. He said, "My son and his daughter on their wedding day." He said, "This is what family looks like. Nothing else." The photograph was shared 614 times in the first week. We do not have a large following. Neither does James's father. It simply traveled in the way that things travel when they are true. People who did not know us shared it. People wrote in the comments about their own families, their own children, their own moments where someone had crouched down at the end of an aisle. One woman wrote, "My husband did this for my son at our wedding 12 years ago. And my son is now his son officially. And this photograph is why I cried for 10 minutes. One person wrote simply, "The petals." Another wrote, "Look at his face. Look at her face. Look at the basket still swinging." 412 people liked the photograph on a platform when nobody knew who James was or who Zoe was or what had been said in a catering room 90 minutes before it was taken. None of that is in the photograph. None of the 2 years of Carol's warmth and what was underneath it. None of the morning. None of the 3 sentences I said in that catering room. None of the 92 people watching. None of Rachel standing in the bridal suite doorway, saying, "I know you will be calm." Just the June light. Just the petals. Just James on one knee with his arms open and the child running to fill them. Look at his face. Look at her face. Look at the basket still swinging. That is the whole thing. That is what we protected on the morning of our wedding when someone with different ideas about who this family was tried to change it. The basket is still swinging. The petals are still falling. He is still on one knee. She is still running. She will always be running toward him. That is the family we built. That is the family that nobody got to redefine. That is ours.